Hi there, this is Ron Rogers, and this video is titled Fail, Probationary Flight Officer Oral. And there's actually two aspects to this video here. First one is the fact that Tom, not his real name, L, that is his real name, and I walked into our probationary flight oral. I was the only one who ended up with a career at United Airlines. Okay? I kind of explain exactly what happened, but probably one of the most uncomfortable orals I'd ever been through in my life. And the other aspect is somebody asked when I mentioned about no notice oral and, quizzing the examiner on 6-volt lights and 12-volt lights. They go, what the heck would you need to know 6-volt lights and 12-volt lights? Well, you don't, obviously. You can be a totally successful pilot without knowing anything about 6-volt and 12-volt lights. But there's a very interesting story about how that whole thing came about with the 6-volt and 12-volt light bulb. I think you'll find it interesting, but let's go and do a little bit of background here. Okay. I always liked electronics, technical devices. I got my degree in electrical engineering at the University of Iowa, and yes, we actually spent 1 week talking about vacuum tubes. We had kind of moved on from them, but this made me like to get into a lot of detail about aircraft systems, and I could basically read the flight manual, the Dash 1 in the Air Force, and could pretty much memorize it. And when I would go through this as a student, I came across a little thing on the T-38 wing flap system that it takes full flap extension or retraction takes from 10 to 17 seconds. Well, this is kind of interesting because you've got the gearbox there that drives the generators. Now, the flap motors are driven by AC synchronous motors. So it's not like hydraulics or a DC motor where you're going to have a load. These are synchronous. They will operate at the same rate. So why is there a range of all things? Well, then I started looking at the electrical system and I noticed something in the electrical system. I noticed when talking about the airframe mounted gearbox, that the gearbox there's a shift there. And the shift mechanism keeps the AC generator output between 320 and 480 cycles. Okay, and this occurs between 65 and 70%. Well, if I still got you here, I know, okay, this is boring crap. But the point of it is that it depended. I went and talked to the maintenance people. I'm a student. I go down to the maintenance people and I said, can you explain this to me? And I found the right guy finally. And he goes, oh, yeah. If you're at the low range of the shift cycle and you're only putting out the 320, it's gonna take longer than the 480, and the 480 is going to give you a higher speed. Well, I thought, oh, I got my little piece of knowledge here. This is so much fun. I'm enjoying this. Well, here's my yearbook entry here, and on the ground it says I could always be counted on for a detailed answer during monitored briefings. Now, monitored briefings mean that our flight, either C flight or L flight, was being essentially inspected, and sometimes it would be the wing stand of L people that were down. I mean, from headquarters, and I was the guy they always called on because they knew that I could give them an answer. And of course, here it says my choice assignment is to write the NITs for the Air Force Dash 1 because I like getting into details. Okay, and there was one briefing I remember, a T-38s, where, and that's why I went through the whole thing about cycles and that, where they called me and says, I want you to explain the flap system. And I said, yes, sir, it's an AC synchronous motor flap system. And then I said that the extension time is between 10 and 17 seconds. And I said, I could have stopped there. Okay, well, I have, you may not have noticed this, but I have a tendency to digress, to, kind of go on with stories. And instead of stopping, I said, and the reason for that is due to the shift cycle on the generator, and it depends on what the frequency is between 320 and 480 on the length of the extension. And the flight commander up there at the front, I remember Captain Miller, you could start to see him smile, and you could see the Stan of L guy giving us the thing in the back. He's shaking his head, and Captain Miller later told me he was accused of putting a ringer in there. But anyway, I was the one that was called on because I could always give a little more detailed answer. And okay, some people say when you're given an oral, just give the answer. Okay, that's not my style. I tend to go on as much detail as I can because it kind of makes the oral go faster. And I answer the questions very quickly. I said, no, answer them slowly, take your time. Well, if the oral is going bad, it will be a long oral because instead of a 2 hour oral, there are orals that go like over 3 hours because the examiner is trying to determine that does this guy know enough that I can pass him? Because I don't want to go through the paperwork of busting him. So maybe he knows enough stuff. He keeps missing a lot, but if he knows enough. So if you want a long oral, yeah, drag it out. Don't know what you're talking about. It'll last forever. And I'm going to tell you about an extremely short oral that I had. Now, okay, I go out to United Airlines and I am actually blown away by the quality of not only the facilities, because I interviewed with TWA and I saw their place and I'm going, yeah, no one of these guys are going down. But okay, I'm out there at the train station, and not only that, but the instructors have an amazing knowledge background. I mean, these guys these are retired people, or some of them professional engineers and stuff. Professional 727 engineers. Now, these people, they know the systems backwards and forwards, and you could learn so much from them. And I kept my same kind of genre, or of first of all, you're on probation for a year, and I wasn't going to be caught flat-footed on not knowing my systems in that. So we go through, and you get your typical systems knowledge here. And I had there were a number of the instructors who were also the examiners for the flight engineers, and two of them were the really hardcore examiner. You didn't want to get this guy because he would take you way down the rabbit hole, asking you questions that not even the people who virtually designed the thing knew. So these were the guys you didn't want to get. Well, on one of my first orals, I had the black gentleman who had a cane. Those of you of my era in United Airlines probably remember this gentleman, and he had a reputation of being extremely thorough and hard. And so I got him for my oral. And of course, we're going through all the panels and stuff like that. And we're going through the engineer panel. Of course, they expected you to know the engineer panel kind of cold. And I did. And answering them just one question right after another. And then we get to the forward panel. Now, the forward panel, that's the pilot territory. Now, this is back before CLR, CRM, all this stuff that, the second officer, he takes care of the panel. You don't worry about the pilot stuff up there. That's the pilot stuff, and that's for you later, but not right now. So they at times would tend to gloss over what was going on the front panel here. So I'm going through, and he's asking me all sorts of questions, and I'm explaining it, and stuff like that. And this gentleman, the old black gentleman, gets to the point and he says, okay, those marker beacon lights there, what voltage powers those? Oh my God, I didn't have a clue. We'd never talked about this, never discussed it, never even thought about it. And he goes, what voltage powers that? And I go, I don't know. And that's the green arrow there for the marker beacons. Then he goes over to the yellow arrow. Those are the progress display lights. He says, what the voltage of the light on those progress display lights? And I go, I don't know. And he looks at me sternly and he says, you don't know the voltage on those? What if one burns out and the captain says, I need this replaced? Because we had a big box in the back. Anybody who's been a 27 engineer knows there was this huge box of light bulbs. You had every light bulb in the world there. And you had this huge box. And you would go there and get the correct bulb. But I said to the examiner, I said, well, I'd have the captain pull the bulb out, or I'd pull it out depending on the situation. And on the bulb is a number. I would take that number. I would go to the back box. I would find the bulb with the corresponding number on it. And I said I would replace it. I don't really need to know the voltage because I got the number. And the number is all I really need to know. And a slight corollary to that is Captain and I are deadheading back in the 27 and our reading lights out. And we don't want to go the whole time with the reading lights out. So he says, well, we can replace it. So he reaches up and we start kind of disassembling the overhead little panel there. We got the wires hanging down to get the bulb out. Flight attendant comes by and goes, what are you doing? And the captain says, have the second officer give us one of these bulbs that preferably isn't burned out. And she looks at us and says, are you pilots? And we go, yeah, we're pilots. Oh, okay, because we were disassembling the aircraft, which probably doesn't look too good. This is pre 9/11. Post 9/11 would probably been tackled by passengers, but okay, pre 9/11. So we get the bulb, we got the reading light, and gone. Okay, so okay, we do that, and he looks at me after I tell him I just do the number, and he starts to get this little grin on his face, and he says, "Good answer, you passed." He says, "By the way, if anybody ever asks you again, the green arrow, that's 6 volts, and the yellow arrow is 12 volts." So we kind of laughed about that, and it went on. And I had an interaction with this gentleman about 6.5 years later, which is partially where this story is going. All right, so we've got the probationary flight officer Eval, and Tom, not his real name. Al and I walk in there, and we know we're being furloughed. We're furloughed, and we're kept back on this leave of absence thing. But we know it's coming. We know we're going to be furloughed, but we got to know stuff to pass this oral. Okay, so we go in there, we get the probationary oral, and Tom had a lot of bad stuff going on in his life. He was getting divorced. They were as part of the divorce settlement trying to sell the house. He's going through all this packing up. Life was not good for Tom at the time, and Tom had not studied. And I mean, okay, you don't. This is not the type of oral you want to be in on, because Tom virtually knew nothing about the 727, and the examiner would ask him a question, and he would say, and this is the old ground proximity warning system. There were 5 things that would set it off. It was, it didn't have the database. It was all radar, altimeter, sync rate, stuff like that. And he says, what 5 things will set off the ground proximity warning system? I remember that distinctly. I mean, he had a lot of stuff he didn't answer well, but we got to that, and the examiner asked him what 5 things would set it off, and he could not get one of them. Okay, well, then the examiner turns to me. If you ever been in this situation, it's a little bit of a pickle. I don't want to make my fellow pilot look bad, but I got to answer the question. Okay, I got to answer the question, because this is my posterior on the line here. So I didn't answer it super. I just kind of went through it, and did the answer, and then they went on to Al and asked him. They came back around, and this whole thing went like this, and we walked out of the oral. The examiner didn't say anything to anybody at the time. We walked out of the oral. L turned to me and he says, if Tom passed that oral, I will never worry about another oral in my airline, in my airline career. Tom did not pass the oral, and L, we were getting furloughed. Al goes on over to U.S. Air, and he says, "Hey, why don't you come over to U.S. Air?" And he goes, "Well, no. They told me this furlough will only be a year, and I'll be right back." Well, it wasn't a year. It was 4.5 years, 1,692 days, but who's counting? I went for Cessna flight test, Boeing flight test, lead engineer in the microwave technology group at Boeing, and I watched Al's career over at U.S. Airways. He started out as a flight engineer, upgraded to co-pilot. As I was being recalled to United Airlines, he was upgrading to captain. Yeah, okay, and he had a good career. I talked to him late in his career. I was on the 777. He was on the 330, and just having a fun time. But he was a good friend. We were both based at Cleveland. But anyway, okay, I get recalled. Here we come back. 727 officer. I come back as. Second time I'm going through the school. Went through the school 4 times, like I mentioned, total. Okay, this second time going through, and I actually remembered things, and we're going through, we're going through all the systems and stuff, and getting refreshed. Okay, it's time for my oral. Well, guess who I get? I said there were 2 old guys that were the real tough guys. Well, I get the other old guy. And this guy was a character. He was a lot of fun. We would be in the briefing, and he'd put his head out the door there and look at the secretary and make some very inappropriate comments at the secretary, who was a third to a quarter of his age, and just kind of shake his, Anyway, I digress there. But he was extremely thorough type of guy. Well, he wasn't my main instructor, because you can't have your instructor give you the oral. I mean, that's one hand washing the other sort of thing. We're not in politics here, so that doesn't work. But he ends up giving me the oral. Okay, well, I know he had this reputation, but we're getting ready to start the oral. And the black guy with the cane goes by, and he looks in there and he says, "Oh," he looks at me. He didn't remember me because these guys go through so many people, and it had been um, almost 6 years since he gave me that last oral. He didn't remember me at all, but he looks at me and says, "Oh, you got a tough one here." And both of us kind of laugh in that. So my instructor starts going through the oral, and of course we go through the engineer panel and stuff like that. And he asks me a question, I answer it. And he asks me another question, and I answer it. And it's just boom, boom, boom like that. And he starts, of course, they always start out with an easy question, like what does the window heat switch do, and stuff like that. And then if you're doing well, they up it, and the speed at which they up it depends on how well you do. And I'm firing off the answers, and we're about 15 minutes into the oral, and he goes to the front panel, and he looks at it and says, "All you got is battery power. Everything else is dead. All the generators offline. You had the 9 bulb trip. You can't get anything back. Captain's got DC power only. What works? What doesn't work?" So, he had the long stick with a little pointer and stuff like that. I said, "Could I borrow that?" So I take it and I start pointing. I said, "This works. This doesn't work. This works. This doesn't work. This works. This works. That doesn't work. Doesn't work. This works because it's on standby power. The captain's instrument." I go over when you put the gear handle down, and this is the advanced, and it works this way on the advanced. It doesn't work that way on the standard and stretch. But when you put the gear handle down, the unlock lights come on, and then the unlock lights go off. When the unlock lights go off, the gear is down in lock. You will not get 3 green. And just then, the black guy with a cane was walking by, and the guy said, "Oral's over." And the the black examiner with the cane, he looks at me and he goes, "Oh my God, you failed." And usually you don't fail that quick, but when the guy said the oral, he says you failed, and the guy says no, he passed. The guy looks at his watch. It's 15 minutes, and he goes, "Yeah, he knows his stuff. We got through it quickly." And he started laughing. He says, "Oh, okay, well, I know your reputation," and he did. Uh, and I said, so I said to the black instructor, I said, "By the way, sir, do you know which bulbs are 6 volt and which bulbs are 12 volts?" And he looks at me and I said, "You taught me that." And then he laughs and he says, "Yeah, that sounds like something I would have taught." So that was kind of a fun close the loop, and that's why I remembered that esoteric little comment. So 37 years later, my career ends. Al has a nice career at U.S. Airways, of course, with all the mergers and stuff. We had a few too. So I have no idea whatever happened to Tom. Never saw him again in my life, but he did not. He was done. Now, I must admit, United, to be fair, they gave him a chance. They told him, "We're going to give you another oral." And they gave him a couple of days to study. They gave him another oral. They gave him a line check. He failed the oral again, and it was like, "Well, we're sorry. Okay, we gave you a second chance, and you blew it." So that's the story of the probationary flight officer fail. Fortunately, it wasn't me. And the derivation of the mysterious 6 volt and 12 volt lights on the 727. I hope you found it interesting and informative. Thanks for watching.